Hi, it's our week 5 instructor highlights video. I'm going to try to make this one quick because I know that work is kind of ramping up in all of your classes as we're approaching the end of the semester, and I don't want to take up any more time than I need to. First, a look back on week 4. Our learning focus was on the topic of consequences in regards to the 4-way method of ethical decision making. My big takeaway when I read the chapter on consequences again this time around was about how, in order to make ethical decisions, you need to consider not only your own personal consequences, but consequences for other people and other things besides just yourself. And how, I guess the reason why this stood out for me was because I think back to my upbringing and learning about consequences from my parents, and how my parents always focused on my personal consequences. You know, they if think about it, Krista, if you do this, what's going to happen to you? What could happen to you? And it was always about what could happen to me, and they didn't really emphasize so much about thinking about, you know, how different decisions were going to affect my friends, my classmates, maybe the place where I worked, those sort of things. And you know, perhaps that's just a function of starting to learn decision making in general. That's a very good place to start, is thinking about your own personal consequences, because quite frankly, as children, we don't even really think about how our actions are going to impact us personally. And so that might be a function of it. But I when I read this chapter, it made me realize that you know, it really wasn't until I was in my 20s where I and I started to need to rely on support networks outside of my nuclear family, that the consequences of my actions on others really came into play in my decision-making process. And another thought I had in that regards is that, you know, perhaps part of what's coming into play here is that I am a citizen of the United States, and in the United States, it has always valued individualism and individualistic thinking, to the point where we almost put it on a pedestal. You know, the idea of the lone rider, or you know, the hero, the person who does it all themselves. And I wonder if that doesn't come into play when one is thinking about decisions, and that, so that we tend to not think further beyond, well, how is this going to personally impact me, because of that emphasis on individualism, and how, you know, we have to take college courses like this in order to really start thinking about, you know, how our actions are going to both positively and negatively impact the common good. That common good thinking doesn't come naturally to everyone. And it seems, and especially here in the United States. So that was just another thought that I had in regards to consequences. And then the last thing too, along the whole line of thinking beyond your own personal consequences, is that to make truly ethical decisions, we also have to consider how potential actions are going to affect our opponent, whether it's someone that we have disagreement with, or you know, or just on opposite sides of an ethical issue. You know, how is what I'm proposing going to affect this person? And I think that in politics, especially right now, you see where this breakdown in ethics is happening because people maybe they're thinking about their own personal consequences. They may be thinking about the consequences and impacts on the environment and others in their community. But are they concerned about how actions or potential decisions are going to impact their opponents, those that they disagree with? And I think that is something that we need to do in order. It is a great indication that a decision is truly ethical and moral if your opponent's consequences are also considered and is part of that decision-making process. The whole idea that, sometimes decisions we realize are going to have a negative impact on people. And in fact, sometimes, no matter what decision we make, someone's going to be negatively impacted. For instance, our opponent. And how it's important that we make a decision that is going to have the least harm, cause the least loss to our opponent. So just something to think about in regards to consequences from this last week. So moving on to this week, week 5, we are talking about fairness and character, the last two aspects of the 4-way method of ethical decision making. So this week, the reading is solely from Kite, An Ethical Life. You are to read chapter 5, which is fairness, and chapter 6, which is character. In chapter 5 on fairness, the three kind of the big things that I pay attention to when I look at that chapter is the information on Kant's categorical imperative, which is basically the golden rule. And the golden rule was a theme in our religious diversity video and discussions. So his kind of take on that and how it is applied to ethics. Also his principle of autonomy, which is the idea that ethical decisions do not deny another of free choice. And Kite offers several instances where people are denied their free choice and how those are indicators that an action is perhaps not the most ethical. And then also he just glances on Rawls' theory of justice. And this is a theory that in the 300 level mission seminar, Serving the Common Good, we take a more in-depth look at. However, quite honestly, one could probably spend a whole semester studying Rawls' theory of justice. It is very dense and a very dense concept. And the language in the actual document by Rawls is difficult to read. Luckily, we don't have to read that in this class. However, so we Kite kind of breaks down some of the key points in regards to fairness that Rawls goes over. And one of the big ones is the concept of the veil of ignorance, which is what we use in our justice system here in the United States. Judges are encouraged to put on this lens of unbias when making decisions, that you're supposed to try to ignore or forget your station in life, your personal circumstances, and how a particular law or policy would personally affect you. You're supposed to set that all aside and look at it from just a purely sort of almost blank slate. How is this going to affect others in general sort of standpoint? Chapter 6 is on character. And Kite goes over all 7 of the classical virtues. These are divided into cardinal virtues and theological virtues. The cardinal virtues are wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. And then the theological virtues are faith, hope, and love. So you are probably already familiar with some of these, but he goes into a little more detail about how these are used in ethical decision making. And then he also talks about how to go about applying character to ethics, which I thought was, that like stood, as I was reviewing this chapter, that really stood out to me because of Christie's discussion board from last week about the just culture algorithm that a committee that she's on at work has started to use in reviewing any concerns about behavior, the ethics of behavior of people in the workplace. And what she had noted and others had noted was that this algorithm leaves out character. And in fact, the whole point of this algorithm is to not have character, to ensure that character, which was thought of as being biased, is not a part of deciding if action was unethical or not. And Kite explains to us why that is. He explains that character is considered as a way to prevent ethical disputes from happening. The character is not used in resolving or determining an ethical issue, which is very much how that discussion board conversation went. So just suggesting to key in on that if you were engaged in that discussion board like many others were. Our discussion boards this week, we have 2 of them. The first is a discussion on the mission seminars, of which the Unified Mission Seminar is one. I've included a link at the bottom of the guidelines for you to check out. It takes you to Viterbo's Mission Seminar web page. So go to that, do some reading to familiarize yourself with the other mission seminars that the traditional undergrads are required to take. And then in the discussion board, you're asked to compare and contrast the 4 course topics that we've covered in this class and which are covered in each of those other mission seminars: Franciscan values, common good, diversity, ethics. Then you're asked to identify some key points to this course that some key points that you've realized through this course, and how has this course affected you personally. And the rubric that is to be used with this discussion is the online discussion rubric, and that can be found on page 26 of the Adult Learner's Guide. The second discussion board is on inspirational leaders. There is a link to a TED Talk to watch. And then on the discussion board, you're asked to relate how the video relates to our other course topics. Talk about a time that you have ever felt inspired, and then let us know, did you act on your inspiration? And if you did, what encouraged you to action? And if you didn't, what was the obstacle for you acting upon that inspiration? We are using the online video discussion rubric for this one, and that can be found on page 26 in the Adult Learner's Guide. We have our last deliberation paper that we're going to start working on this week, so begin researching and writing number 6. The guidelines are pretty vague on this one, so I'm going to provide you with a little more guidance here on this video. So the guiding question for this paper should be, are ethical decisions a matter of opinion? So what a guiding question means is that this paper as a whole should answer that question. And then now getting into a little more detail in answering this question, you should write your personal ethical statement or code. And this would include how you see community involvement fitting into your personal ethical statement or code. And then also talking about what attitude, skills, or concepts from KITE are part of your personal ethical statement or code. Once again, as always, make sure that you use at least 3 outside resources to support your opinions in this paper if you want full points on that learning criteria. The paper itself is due on Sunday, April 24th. And I'm really encouraging you, do not procrastinate working on this paper, because as soon as you are done writing this paper, you need to start writing your final paper, because that comes up really quick, and that's a bigger paper. I'll talk about it next week. And if you want to look ahead, already the guidelines and rubric for that paper are posted. I'd also encourage you that if you haven't gotten your 8 instances of service learning completed by this point, you need to get that taken care of, because that is what you will be writing your final paper on, is the service learning experience and integrating it with everything else in this course. So don't procrastinate at this point. And then the other assignment for this week is to write a Q&A essay for KITE Chapter 5 and 6 on fairness and character. And that's due on Sunday, April 17th, excuse me. So that's it. Sorry if you can hear, it sounds like I'm recording from a dance hall here. I don't know, I guess my guys have decided that it's Sunday dance party time. So if you have any questions about this last deliberation paper or about what's expected in the final paper, I'd encourage you to, honestly, at least this week, maybe take a look at the guidelines and rubric that's posted on Moodle for the final paper, so that you can come up with any questions to ask me. And like I said, I'll go over that a little more in detail in the next Instructor Highlights video. So thanks, and we'll talk to you later.